My brother told everyone Mama forgot me before she died. He didn't say it like he was trying to hurt me. That was the worst part. He said it softly, with that tired little sigh men use when they want to look burdened instead of cruel. Mama changed near the end, he told the family in her kitchen, right beside the casserole dishes and pound cake people always bring when somebody dies. She didn't trust Loretta anymore. I hate saying that, but y'all deserve the truth. I was standing 3 feet away when he said it, 3 feet close. Enough to see the little twitch in his jaw when he lied, close. Enough to smell the coffee on his breath and the starch in his Sunday shirt, close enough to know he had rehearsed that sentence before I ever walked through Mama's front door. Nobody looked at me right away. Not Aunt Sheila. Not Cousin Denise. Not even Pastor Boone, who had baptized both of us when we were children and used to tell Mama she'd raised one stubborn daughter and one charming son, which was a polite church way of saying one of us would tell the truth even when it cost something and the other knew how to make a room love him. Before it noticed what was missing. My brother, Curtis, stood by the sink like grief had made him noble, and just like that in my own mother's house, I became the woman who had supposedly been forgotten. I should tell you something about my mother before I tell you what he did. My mother forgot birthdays sometimes. She forgot where she left her glasses, then found them on top of her head. She forgot recipes she had made for 30 years, then laughed and added too much nutmeg anyway. But she did not forget her children. Not in the deep way Curtis wanted people to believe. Not in the way that would explain what came later. Even in the last month, when her arthritis had gotten so bad she held teacups with both hands and winced if the weather shifted wrong. She still knew my voice when I called, "Baby," she'd say. The second I said hello. Not Loretta. Not who is this? Baby, you do not spend 68 years being somebody's mother. And suddenly misplace that kind of knowing. That was why his lie bothered me less for how ugly it was, and more for how strategic it sounded. It wasn't random. It wasn't grief talking wild. It was groundwork. He was building something, and I didn't understand what until later that night, when I found the first bank statement. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Mama's funeral had ended 2 hours earlier. The house still smelled like black coffee, starch, perfume, and people trying to behave. Somebody had left deviled eggs on the dining table untouched. Somebody else had placed a framed picture of Mama on the mantle, the good church photo. Not one of the real ones where she was laughing. To Harder, rolling her eyes at something foolish Curtis had said. In the photo she looked gentle. In real life she had been gentler than most people. Deserved and sharper than most people remembered. Curtis knew that. That was why he moved fast. By 6 o'clock he had already taken control of the house without asking anybody. He had Mama's purse, Mama's keyring, Mama's checkbook, Mama's medication list. Every time somebody asked where something was, he answered before I could. Every time somebody offered to help, he redirected them like he had been waiting years to become the man at the center of the room. When Aunt Sheila asked whether Mama had any written wishes about the jewelry, Curtis didn't even blink. "She told me all that a while back," he said. "I've got it handled." Handled. I hated that word. By the end of the evening. It sat on everything like grease. I was in the kitchen, rinsing plates no one had eaten from when Cousin Denise came beside me and lowered her voice. "You okay?" "No." She nodded like that was the right answer. "Curtis says your Mama got confused about a lot near the end." I kept my eyes on the sink. "Curtis says a lot of things." Denise dried her hands on a dish towel. "I'm just telling you what folks are hearing." That was fair. It was also a warning. I glanced through the kitchen doorway into the den where Curtis was laughing softly, with Uncle Marvin like the burdened son doing his best. He had Mama's house slippers sitting beside his feet in a grocery bag with other things he had already gathered for safekeeping. That was the moment a small cold thing settled in my stomach. Not panic. Recognition. I had seen men like him before. Men who understood that if they controlled the first version of events, they could make everybody else spend the rest of the time catching up. I dried my hands and walked straight into the den. "Where's Mama's purse?" The room went quiet fast enough to be suspicious. Curtis looked up. "Why?" "Because I asked." He gave me a patient smile. "I put her important things away. I didn't want stuff disappearing with so many people in and out." I stared at him. Stuff? He meant our mother's life like it was junk in a hallway. "And you decided that alone?" I asked. He set down his coffee cup. "Loretta, not tonight, no. Tonight is exactly when people start doing slick things and calling them practical." Uncle Marvin stood up so quick his knees cracked. "Now hold on. No. Uncle Marvin," I said without looking at him. "He's been talking all evening like Mama left him in charge of the atmosphere, the house, and the truth, and I'm asking one simple question. Where is her purse?" Curtis exhaled through his nose and stood. He was taller than me, broader too. And he had always relied on that, on the quiet physical fact of himself, to make women lower their voices first. She's gone, he said. Can we do this with dignity? I laughed. Not because it was funny, because once a lying man says the word dignity, somebody's about to get robbed. Bring me her purse. He stared at me for a long second. Then he walked down the hall to Mama's bedroom. I followed. He didn't like that. You could see it in the stiffness of his shoulders. How he wanted to be alone with whatever he had already sorted through. But I stayed right behind him anyway. Mama's room still smelled like cold cream, peppermint, and those little lavender sachets she used to tuck into her dresser drawers. Her robe hung behind the door. Her Bible was open on the bedside table to Psalms. Reading glasses on top. Pen nearby. Like she had only stepped out. Curtis went to the closet shelf and brought down her brown purse. Too fast. He knew exactly where it was. He handed it to me with that same tight, patient smile. Happy? No. I opened it right there. Wallet, keys to peppermint candies, church bulletin, lipstick, receipts, an old photo of me and Mama at the lake from maybe 15 years ago. But no debit card. I looked up at him. Where's her bank card? He crossed his arms. Probably canceled. Probably isn't an answer. Loretta, the woman is dead. Why are you worried about a debit card? Because dead women don't use debit cards, I thought. Because live thieves do. Instead I said, because I know what Mama kept in her wallet. And it isn't here. His face didn't change much. That was what made him dangerous. Curtis had always known how to keep his expressions modest enough to survive. I've been helping with her bills for months, he said. I took the cards so nothing would get charged after her passing. That's not your decision. It became my decision when you weren't around. That hit exactly where he meant it to. Because I hadn't been there every day. Not in the end. I had a job 40 minutes away and a mortgage and 2 grown kids still calling me. Like I was the emergency line for their whole lives. I came every weekend. I called every other day. I brought groceries, took Mama to appointments when I could, argued with insurance on my lunch break, set up automatic refills when her hands hurt too much to open bottles. Curtis, on the other hand, lived 10 minutes away, and still somehow always arrived just often enough to be seen. Never long enough to be tired. That was his magic. He collected credit in public and left labor to other people. I was around, I said quietly. He looked down at me. Not the way Mama needed. There it was, the real blade, not just theft. If theft had happened. Narrative. He wasn't only trying to take control of her things, he was trying to rewrite what kind of daughter I had been. I could have screamed. Instead I put the purse back on the bed and said, give me the card. He shook his head once. No. You better pray I find a better reason for that than the one I'm starting to build. For the first time, something flashed in his eyes, fast, ugly. Then it was gone. You're emotional. He said, go home and sleep. I stepped toward him. This is my mother's house too. No. He said, lower now. It was your mother's house. Now it's an estate. And until things are sorted, you need to stop acting like you can just grab what you want. I stared at him. Then past him. At Mama's writing desk by the window, the drawer was open a half-inch. That desk had always been her command station. Stamps, church envelopes, pay bills, notes, doctor reminders, grocery lists. All stacked in neat little piles because Mama believed order was what kept life from becoming disrespectful. Curtis saw me looking and then he moved just one step, but enough to tell me he didn't want me near that desk. So, of course, that was the first place I went. After everyone finally left and he drove off with Mama's important papers in a plastic file bin he had brought from his own house, I didn't even pretend I was going to sleep. I waited until the taillights disappeared down the road, locked the front door, and went straight back to Mama's bedroom in my stockings so the floorboards wouldn't complain. The house was quiet in that painful way houses get after funerals. Like the walls themselves know somebody isn't coming back. I stood at Mama's desk for a long moment before touching anything. Not because I was afraid of what I'd find. Because I hated that suspicion had followed me here. Into the room of the woman who had taught me to say grace, have my own dresses, and never leave a man alone with a story if I knew he was lying. Then I opened the drawer. At first it was just the usual things, stamps, rubber bands, a church directory, 3 expired coupons Mama had saved out of habit, a notepad with grocery lists in her square careful handwriting, milk, tea bags, catfish on Friday, call Loretta. That last line almost took the air out of me. Call Loretta. I sat down hard in her desk chair and touched the paper with 2 fingers. Curtis said she forgot me. But right there, in ink, was proof that my name still lived where she kept the things she didn't want to lose. I should have cried. Instead I kept searching. At the back of the drawer, under an old tax envelope, I found 3 unopened bank statements rubber banded together. First Commonwealth Bank. Mama hated online banking. Said if a screen could hide it, a person could lie about it. So she still got paper statements every month and tucked them into that desk until she had the patience to reconcile everything with her check register. The top statement was from the previous month. I opened it because it was there. The first page showed the checking balance. Lower than I expected, but not shocking. Mama lived simply. She wasn't rich, but she had been careful her whole life. Whatever little she had, she watched. Then I turned the page and there they were. Cash withdrawals. Not one. Not two. 7 over 5 weeks. $300. 400. 600. To separate withdrawals of $800 each. I frowned. Mama used cash for small things. Hair appointments, church fish fry plates, tipping the boy who mowed her yard when Curtis forgot to come. But not like this. Not that much. Not that often. I checked the dates. My stomach tightened. One withdrawal was on a Tuesday afternoon in mid-March. I knew that Tuesday. I had taken Mama to her rheumatologist in the city that day. We were at the doctor's office for almost 4 hours because the waiting room had been backed up, and her knees were swollen bad enough that she cried in the parking lot after. There was no way in hell she had gone to an ATM afterward. I drove her straight home and helped her into bed. Another withdrawal was dated the Friday after that. On that Friday she had called me at 8:12 p.m. because she couldn't find her TV remote and somehow thought the lamp had taken it. We laughed for 10 minutes when I found it between the couch cushions while talking her through the living room over speakerphone. She had not been riding around town withdrawing cash. I turned to the second statement. Same pattern, more cash, more withdrawals, to purchases from an electronics store Mama had never set foot in. One charge at a men's clothing outlet 40 miles away. Another at a steakhouse in a part of town she considered too loud and too white. I sat back slowly in the chair. No. I grabbed the check register from the drawer and opened it. Mama had stopped writing in it regularly toward the end, but there were still notations. Light, shaky handwriting, dates, balances. A few question marks besides some entries she clearly meant to check later. Then I found the line that made the room go cold. March 14. Ask bank about withdrawal, written twice, underlined once. Ask bank about withdrawal. I stared at those 5 words until they blurred. That wasn't confusion, that wasn't memory loss, that was suspicion. My mother knew something was wrong, and if she knew, then somebody had counted on her not staying strong enough long enough to stop it. I read every line on those statements until 2 in the morning. Then I made a list on the back of an old utility bill, dates of withdrawals, places, questions, what Mama could physically do on each day, who had access. By 2:30, one name was sitting in the middle of everything even when I tried not to put it there. Curtis. I didn't sleep much. At dawn I found Mama's appointment folder in the hall closet and cross-checked 2 of the dates. One matched the rheumatology visit exactly. Another matched the day her home nurse had written patient remained indoors due to swelling. Indoors. But money still came out of her account. By 8:30. I was parked outside First Commonwealth with the bank statements, Mama's check register, and a headache behind my eyes that felt like judgment. The woman at the desk smiled politely until I explained that my mother had died. There might be irregular activity on her account before death, and I needed information. Her smile changed, not disappeared, just tightened into procedure. I'm sorry for your loss, she said. But unless you're an authorized signer or executor, I can't disclose details. I expected that. It still felt like a slammed door. I'm her daughter. I understand. No, I said, keeping my voice level. You understand policy. I'm trying to understand whether my mother was being financially exploited. That word made her blink. Exploited. She glanced toward a glass office near the back. Please have a seat. 10 minutes later, I was speaking with the branch manager, a woman named Janice Holloway who wore pearl earrings and the expression of somebody who had seen enough family ugliness to stop being surprised by it. She reviewed the statements carefully, then she looked at me. Miss James, I cannot release account records beyond what you already possess without proper authority, but I can advise you to preserve those documents and speak with the estate representative immediately. My brother is acting like the estate representative. That is not what I asked. I leaned forward. My mother wrote ask bank about withdrawal in her own register. She was questioning this before she died. I need to know whether those ATM withdrawals were made locally. Janice folded her hands. I cannot answer that directly. But, she held my gaze a moment longer than rules usually allow. But if I were you, she said carefully, I would pay close attention to where each transaction occurred, and whether your mother would realistically have been present. If there is a pattern inconsistent with her known condition, that would be important to counsel. Counsel. So now we were past family argument and into language with invoices. Was there video? I asked. Her face stayed professional, but something in her eyes said yes before her mouth said what it had to say. Transaction imaging and camera footage are retained for a limited period depending on location. Again, that information would require legal process. Legal process meant lawyers. Lawyers meant somebody was going to get warned and warn people clean up. I stood to leave. Then stopped. One more question, she nodded. If someone close to an elderly account holder had been using her card, and she'd started noticing, what usually happens? Janice was quiet for a moment, then she said, usually? The family says she was confused. I looked at her. She looked back. That was all either of us was allowed to say. I drove straight from the bank to Mama's church. If anybody knew what Mama had been worried about and hadn't told Curtis, it would be Bernice Fields. Miss Bernice had sung beside Mama in the choir for 33 years, served on every committee that involved casseroles, and believed the Lord gave her sharp instincts because some people needed spotting before they bit. When I found her in the fellowship hall stacking paper cups after a women's prayer brunch, she took one look at my face and said, "Well, you found something ugly." I handed her the statements. She read in silence, lips pressed tight. When she finished, she let out one long breath. I knew it, my heart kicked. Knew what? That boy was interested in her purse. I sat down across from her. What do you mean? Bernice lowered her voice even though nobody was close enough to hear. 3 weeks ago your mama told me she couldn't find her debit card. Said Curtis had helped put her things in order and after that, it kept disappearing and reappearing. Oh, and still. She told you that? She told me she was embarrassed to accuse him. Said maybe she was mixing things up. But then she asked me. Bernice stopped and looked at the statements again. Lord have mercy, what? Bernice looked up. She asked me if banks could print where cash was taken out. Exact locations. There it was. Proof that Mama had been tracking the same thing I was. I could feel my pulse in my throat. Why didn't you tell me? Bernice's eyes softened. Because your mama made me promise not to start family war while she was alive. She said if she was wrong, she didn't want to shame her son. And if she was right. Bernice tapped the paper. I think she hoped she'd get strong enough to handle it herself. I looked down at the statements. Mama knew, yes, she knew something was wrong, yes, and suddenly grief changed shape. Until then, I had been mourning my mother. Now I was mourning the fact that she had spent part of her last weeks wondering whether her own son was stealing from her. That is a different kind of sorrow, a dirtier one. Bernice reached into her handbag and took out a folded church bulletin. There's something else inside. The bulletin was a small square receipt, faded and wrinkled from being folded too long. ATM fee. March 14th, 3:42 p.m. Same date as the withdrawal Mama had underlined. My fingers went cold. Where did you get this? Your mama gave it to me after Bible study. Said she found it in the pocket of the cardigan Curtis left on the back of her chair. I looked up so fast my neck hurt. What? She asked him about it. He told her he must have used a machine nearby while out running errands, and accidentally mixed the paper up with hers. Bernice's mouth hardened. She didn't believe him. March 14th, the day I had taken Mama to the doctor, which meant Curtis had either used her card while she was with me or withdrawn cash earlier, and left the receipt behind. Either way, he had lied. I stared at that little piece of paper like it was a confession. Keep the safe, Bernice said. And Loretta. I looked up. That boy is going to call you bitter before he ever calls himself guilty. She was right. By the time I got back to Mama's house, Curtis was already there. His truck in the driveway, his key in the front door, his voice coming from the den like he paid taxes on the place. I stepped inside and heard him talking on the phone. She's emotional, that's all, he was saying. She always thinks the worst. Mama was forgetting things left and right. I stood in the hall and listened. No. I've got the statements. I said I've got them. My whole body went still. The statements. Not some statements. The statements. He turned as he said it and saw me. The color left his face so fast I almost enjoyed it. He lowered the phone. I'll call you back. Then he hung up. We stared at each other across my mother's hallway while the house held its breath around us. I stepped forward slowly. Who were you talking to? He slid the phone into his pocket. None of your business. The statements are none of my business either. His jaw flexed. And right there I knew 2 things for sure. He knew I was onto him. And whatever he had done, he had not done it alone. I held up the ATM receipt between 2 fingers. What is this, Curtis? His eyes dropped to it, then came back to me. And for the first time since Mama died, my brother stopped looking like the grieving son. He looked like a man doing math with fear. He recovered fast. That was Curtis's other gift. He could look hot for half a second and spend the next 10 minutes punishing you for noticing. That, he said, to evenly is an ATM receipt. I know what it is. So why are you acting like you found blood on a knife? Because this date matches one of the withdrawals, Mama questioned. His jaw tightened. And Mama was with me and her doctor that afternoon. He folded his arms. Then maybe I made a withdrawal for her. I stared at him, just stared. Because sometimes a lie arrives so quick, so polished you can still hear the machine it came out of. You made a withdrawal for her. I repeated, yes, she asked you to, yes, with her card, yes. While she was with me, he blinked once, then shrugged. She gave it to me before. That was sloppy, even he knew it. I watched the correction happen behind his eyes. Too late to save him. Mama did not hand out that card. Not to me, not to the pharmacist, not to the hairdresser she'd known 20 years. If she wanted cash, she went herself or sent me with a list so precise it might as well have been military paperwork. You're lying, I said. Curtis sighed and rubbed a hand over his face like I was exhausting him. Loretta, you want me to be lying because it helps you explain why Mama trusted me more in the end? I laughed. Right in his face. Mama trusted you so much she wrote, ask bank about withdrawal in her check register. That landed, not dramatically. He didn't flinch big, didn't curse, didn't step back, but his eyes changed. That's the thing about people who think they're smarter than everybody else. The first time they realize you have more than they expected, they go still, just still. Where did you get that? He asked. In her desk. Where you somehow forgot to clean up? That was private. No, I said. Stealing from our mother was private. Now it's evidence. He took one step toward me. You better be very careful with what you accuse me of. And you better be very careful with the way you threaten me in Mama's hallway. For a second neither of us moved, then he laughed. But there was no humor in it. You think a couple of bank statements make you a detective? No. I think a couple of bank statements make you nervous. I took care of her, you staged care. I said. That is not the same thing. That hit harder than I expected because under all his lies, Curtis had always loved being seen as a solid one. The son who handled things, the one who drove over after storms, fixed loose railings, carried heavy boxes at church, wore suits to funerals even when he couldn't really afford them. He had built his whole adult life on being the dependable man in public, and maybe, somewhere in that, he had started believing dependable men were entitled to take whatever they wanted in private. He lowered his voice. You think you know everything because you came on weekends and called from your car between errands. I felt that one hit, but I didn't let it show. Say what you actually mean. His mouth tightened. Mama leaned on me. Mama leaned on whoever was there. No, he snapped. Mama leaned on me when stuff got ugly. When the toilet backed up. When the roof leaked. When the insurance sent nonsense letters. When the power bill got shut off because she swore she mailed the check and didn't. You got the phone calls and the hugs. I got the mess. There it was. Not guilt, not yet. Resentment. Old, fermented, waiting resentment, I said, very quietly. So you stole from her because you were tired? His face hardened. I didn't say that. You didn't have. He looked away first, then back at me, and that was when I knew he had done more than borrow, because innocent people stay in the argument. Guilty people start looking for the exit. He reached into his pocket and pulled out Mama's debit card. Just like that. Held it between two fingers. You want it? He asked. I didn't move. He tossed it onto the hall table beside me. There. Happy now? I looked at the card. Then at him. You kept this in your pocket. I told you I was handling things. That card should have been in Mama's wallet. He shrugged. Maybe I forgot. Double quotes. No. He wanted me to say it first. He wanted me to come at him too hard too early. So later he could tell people I sounded unstable. I had known Curtis my whole life. I knew the trap when I saw it. So instead of shouting, I picked up the card, slid it into my purse, and said, I'm going to the bank again tomorrow. He gave me a thin smile. Do that. Then I'm getting a lawyer. His expression flickered. Not much. Just enough. For what? He said. For whatever word they use when a son starts treating his mother's checking account like a side hustle. His eyes went flat. You really want to do this? I met his gaze. You already did. Then I walked past him into the kitchen, put the ATM receipt in a zip bag, and wrote down the exact time of the conversation while it was still hot in my head. Curtis left 10 minutes later without saying goodbye. He backed out of Mama's driveway too fast, gravel popping under his tires, and I stood at the window watching him go with the ugly certainty that this thing had just moved into a different phase. Because now he knew I wasn't swallowing his story, and I knew he was afraid of paper. The next morning, I called in sick to work and spent a straight hours turning grief into organization. I made folders on Mama's dining table, statements, receipts, care dates, questions, possible witnesses. I found her home health binder in the hall cabinet and nearly started crying right there, because she had kept everything so neatly clipped, even when her fingers were too swollen to hold the pen without shaking. Inside were notes from her homemade Darlene Brooks, Darlene came 3 afternoons a week the last 2 months, light cleaning, meal prep, medication reminders, help with bathing when mama's knees got bad enough that standing too long felt like punishment. I flipped through the pages carefully. March 14th, patient, fatigued after doctor appointment, resting, stayed indoors. March 21st, patient upset about misplaced debit card, states I put it back and it's gone again. March 28th, son Curtis visited after 8 departure, patient requested purse be left in bedroom, not kitchen. April 2nd, patient worried about account balance, advised patient to call bank with daughter present. I stopped breathing for a second. Then I read April 2nd again, advised patient to call bank with daughter present. Darlene knew. Maybe not everything, but enough to know mama was worried and wanted me involved. By noon I had called her twice with no answer. On the third try she picked up sounding out of breath like she'd hurried in from the yard. Miss Loretta, it's me. There was a pause. Then, softer, I heard about your mama. I am so sorry. Thank you? I need to ask you something. She went quiet in the way people do when they already know the question won't be easy. Did mama ever say Curtis was using her bank card? Darlene let out a long breath through her nose. I knew this was coming. That wasn't the answer I wanted. It was more useful. Can I come by? I asked. Not my apartment, she said quickly. Meet me at the laundromat on Maple in an hour. That told me everything about how nervous she was. I got there early. Sat in my car under a crooked sycamore tree and watched people carry plastic baskets and detergent jugs through the door while my heart kicked around inside my chest like it wanted out. Darlene arrived wearing scrubs, under a denim jacket and carrying a tote bag with cartoon lemons on it. She looked over both shoulders before coming to my table in the back corner, which is not a thing innocent people do when the subject is simple. She sat down and didn't touch the coffee I bought her. Your brother came by my place last night, she said. Ice moved through me. He what? He asked if your mama had ever seemed confused about money in front of me. I stared at her. What did you tell him? The truth. That your mama had questions sometimes. Darlene folded her hands. Then he asked whether I ever wrote anything down. There it was. He wasn't just afraid of accusation. He was tracing paper trails, I said. Did he threaten you? No. He smiled too much, honestly. Sometimes that's worse. Darlene opened her tote and pulled out a spiral notebook. I recognized immediately, one of the cheap Withdrawal pads mama used for everything from blood pressure numbers to grocery ideas. She gave me this on April 2nd, Darlene said. Told me if she got too sick to sort her papers, I was to make sure you saw certain pages. My fingertips went cold. I took the notebook carefully. Mama's handwriting filled the first half. Lists, dates, little reminders, nothing unusual. Then I found the folded page near the back. March 14th, Curtis said bank mistake. March 21st, card missing again. March 28th. Do not let him help organize. If I ask Loretta, Curtis gets offended. If I don't ask Loretta, I feel foolish. I had to look away. Not because I couldn't read it. Because I could hear her in it, the embarrassment, the doubt. The way older women sometimes start apologizing for their own instincts the minute a son tells them they're imagining things. Darlene watched me read. Then said quietly, your mama wasn't confused the way he's saying. I swallowed hard. I know. She forgot little things. But she knew when somebody was making her feel turned around. I nodded once. Darlene leaned closer. One day I came in, and she was crying because she said Curtis kept telling her the balance was low. Because she was forgetting what she spent. That upset her more than the money. Being made to feel mixed up. There are cruelties worse than theft. That is one of them, I asked. Did she ever actually see him use the card? Darlene shook her head. Not in front of me. But once she found a withdrawal slip in his jacket and asked him about it. He told her he'd used his own card and the machine must have mixed up the paper. She didn't believe that. But she didn't want family shame. Family shame. That phrase has protected more rotten people than any locked door ever has. I copied the notebook pages on my phone. Then asked Darlene if she would speak to a lawyer. She went pale. I need my job. This isn't about dragging you into a circus. This is about my mother. She looked down at the coffee she still hadn't touched. Then she said, if it stays on paper at first, yes. But I'm not getting on a stand unless somebody makes me. Fair. Enough. I left the laundromat with the notebook in my bag in a kind of grief. I didn't know what to do with. Not just because Curtis had likely taken the money. Because mama had tried to protect him from the shame of being caught while he was actively causing the shame. That is what mothers do sometimes, and that is why some children become dangerous. They mistake mercy for cover. By 3 o'clock I was in an attorney's office across town. Janice at the bank had given me the name of an estate lawyer who handled elder financial exploitation matters when families got ugly. Her name was Andrea Mercer, no relation, and she looked like the kind of woman who did not confuse blood with innocence. She read everything in silence, the statements, the receipt, Darlene's notes, Mama's notebook pages, my timeline. Then she set the last page down and said, "Your brother has a story problem." I blinked. A what? A story problem. He's trying to claim your mother was forgetful and that his involvement was caretaking. But the paper suggests she became specifically suspicious of account activity tied to times she was physically limited or absent. She tapped the March 14th note. That's not general confusion. That's pattern recognition. I exhaled slowly. Andrea continued. We need 3 things immediately. First, a petition to preserve bank records and surveillance. Second, formal notice that no estate assets are to be distributed or handled unilaterally. Third, any merchant detail we can get linking purchases to Curtis directly. Can we do that? Yes, she said. The question is whether your brother gets warned before we get enough. That chilled me. Because of course, every legal step that protected me also risked alerting him. Andrea saw the look on my face and said, "Then we move fast." By that evening she had filed emergency preservation notices with the bank and subpoenas for detailed merchant records tied to the suspicious transactions. She also sent a sharp little letter to Curtis informing him that any continued use, transfer, concealment, or removal of estate-related financial records would expose him to liability. I would have paid just to watch him open that envelope 2 days later. He came to Mama's house furious enough to forget his manners. He didn't knock. Just pushed through the screen door and stormed into the kitchen where I was sorting condolence cards into a box. "You got a lawyer?" I kept folding tissue paper around Mama's good serving spoon. "You can read." He slapped Andrea's letter onto the table. "Are you trying to ruin me?" I looked at the paper. Then at him. "No," I said. "I'm trying to understand why you're scared of records." His nostrils flared. "I used that card a few times for her. That's it, for electronics." His face changed. "Not enough for a stranger. Enough for a sister." "What electronics?" he asked. I smiled without warmth. "See, that's the problem with lying. It makes you curious at the wrong times." He took a step toward me. "You don't know what those charges were, no. But my lawyer will." That was when he changed tactics. Men like Curtis always do. When anger stops working, they go sentimental. He pulled out a chair and sat down at Mama's table like he was the injured party in a church play. "Loretta, listen to me. Mama asked me to help. You know how she got near the end. She'd say one thing one day, another the next. Half the time she didn't remember what she'd already paid." I said nothing. He leaned in. "You know what she was like with pride. She'd rather whisper to the bank than admit she needed money. So yes, sometimes I use the card to cover things, gas errands, little stuff for the house. I meant to settle it, little stuff. I thought about the steakhouse charge and the clothing store." "Settle it with who?" I asked. "The dead." His expression flashed irritation again. "Don't do that." "Do what?" "Make this uglier than it is." That one almost made me laugh. "Curtis." Ugliness happened when our mother started writing notes. Because she was afraid her money was disappearing. He froze. Then, quietly, "She wrote notes about me?" I looked at him. Really looked, and for 1 second, just one eye, saw something like hurt in him. Not guilt. Hurt. The wounded vanity of a son who cannot believe. The woman who once defended him to everybody else finally started putting questions on paper. Maybe that is guilt for his cousin. "I don't know. He pushed back from the table. "You always thought she loved you better." There it was, the real thing under all the account numbers. "Not money. Not first. Scorekeeping. Old scorekeeping," I said. "This is not about who she loved, isn't it?" He snapped. "You got the soft version of her. I got the hard one. You got the talks and the secrets and the baby. Sit down. Let me tell you something. I got chores, rules, expectations. If I slipped, she told me I was a man and should know better. If you slipped, she worried, that hurt in a different way because some of it was probably true. Not the theft, not the lies, but the old imbalance underneath. Families rot in those places if nobody ever airs them out." I said quietly. "So what, Curtis? You took from her because you were the underappreciated son?" He looked at me with years in his eyes, years I had not fully measured. Then, he said the ugliest honest thing he'd said. Yet, maybe I took what I already earned. The room went still. Not because he shouted it, because he didn't. He said it like a man announcing whether matter of fact reasonable already. Justified. I felt my stomach turn. "Thank you," I said. His brow tightened. "For what?" For saying that out loud. He stood so fast the chair scraped hard against the floor. "I didn't mean..." "Yes," I said. "You did." He snatched the letter off the table, folded it once too sharply, and jammed it into his pocket. When he got to the door, he turned back and said, "You better remember one thing before you parade this around town." I waited. She was still my mother too. Then he left, and that, right there, was the closest thing to a confession I had gotten so far. Not enough for a judge, plenty for my soul. Andrea agreed. When I told her what he said, she didn't get excited. She got focused. Good, she said. Now, let's make the paperwork say what his mouth almost did 3 days later. The bank records got sharper. The suspicious ATM withdrawals had all been made from either the branch kiosk near Curtis's job or a drive-up machine less than 10 minutes from his apartment. And the merchant detail? That was better because whoever used Mama's card at the electronics store had also used a loyalty phone number tied to Curtis. James. Same with the men's clothing outlet. Same with the steakhouse reservation. Andrea put the printout side by side across her conference table and let me see the stupid arrogance of it. He hadn't just used our mother's card, he had used it while leaving breadcrumbs back to himself. Like he thought no one would ever bother to look. I stared at the steakhouse receipt longer than the others. To dinners, to cocktails. Friday night, party of to. Mama was home in her recliner that night wearing flannel socks and arguing with the Weather Channel. He had used her money to play generous with somebody else. Andrea saw where my eyes cheered. Do you want to know who he dined with? I took a long breath. No, I said. Not because I'm scared. Because it doesn't matter, and a did in single quotes t. Mistress, friend, coworker. Whoever. The insult was already complete. By the end of that week, Andrea had enough to call for a formal family accounting meeting before the estate attorney. Curtis showed up in a navy suit I would have bet money Mama paid for without knowing it. Aunt Sheila came because she didn't trust silence. Pastor Boone came because by then even he understood this wasn't regular grief. Cousin Denise came because families love front row seats when truth finally gets mean. Curtis walked in, smiling like he still had room to manage the story. That smile died quick. Andrea started with the simple stuff. Dates, balances, withdrawals, care notes, Mama's written questions. Then she laid down the merchant detail. Electronics store, Curtis's loyalty number. Men's clothing outlet, Curtis's phone number. Steakhouse reservation, Curtis's name. The room didn't explode. It imploded. That's worse. Aunt Sheila covered her mouth with one hand. Denise whispered, "Oh my God, Pastor." Boone closed his eyes for a second like he was trying to keep prayer from becoming judgment. Curtis sat there staring at the papers as if they might rearrange themselves into mercy. Andrea spoke very calmly. Mr. James, this is the part where you can either explain these charges in a way supported by evidence or continue letting the documents explain you. He looked at me. Instead of her. I think that told me everything. He still believed this was about siblings, still believed he could make me back down if he looked wounded enough. She let me use the card sometimes, he said. Andrea nodded. For steakhouse dinners? He swallowed. For things, for help. For men's clothing? Andrea asked. For house expenses. The electronics were house expenses, she said, sliding the store invoice forward. Interesting, because this appears to be a 6 to 5-inch television delivered to your apartment. The whole room went silent. Curtis's face went gray. He looked at the paper, then at me, then down at his own hands, and just like that I knew he was finished. Not legally. Not yet, but morally. In the room? In the version of himself he had dragged in wearing that suit? Finished. Aunt Sheila said his name like it hurt her to know it. Curtis? He rubbed both palms over his thighs and said, I was going to put it back. That line is so old and so stupid I almost wish liars would retire it out of respect for language. Andrea did not blink. How much? He stared at the table. She repeated. How much total did you intend to put back? No answer. So she answered for him. Based on what we currently have. At least $6,482 in withdrawals and direct charges. Likely more if earlier statements reflect the same pattern. Aunt Sheila made a sound like she'd been slapped. Pastor Boone said quietly, son. Curtis flinched at that. Not at the amount. Not at the evidence. At the word son, because suddenly he wasn't the grieving man of the house anymore. He was a son being looked at by older people who had known him when his pockets only held marbles and pencil stubs, and they were ashamed of him. He tried. One last time. I did things for her nobody here saw, he said. Nobody. I gave up time, gas, work days. That does not authorize theft, Andrea said. She would have helped me if I'd asked. I leaned forward then. Finally. Then why didn't you ask? He looked at me. And there it was. The thing underneath all the paperwork. Not just greed. Pride. Humiliation. Entitlement. Because asking would have made him small. Taking let him keep the fantasy that he was owed. She always made me feel like I was behind. He said quietly. Like no matter what I did, I was still the son she had to worry about. Nobody spoke. He kept going. Because once truth finally finds a crack, it likes air. when I lost that contract job last fall. She looked at me like I was 17 again. Then you started coming around with your lists and your prescriptions and your little organized folders, and suddenly I'm the fool son who can't get his life together. While St. Loretta handles everything, I let him talk. Not because I wanted to hear it, because I wanted everyone else to. She gave you softness, he said. She gave me shame. That one sat in the room a long time because families know when a lie carries pieces of truth inside it. Mama had been harder on him, that was true. Mama had expected more from him because he was a son. Also true. But none of that built a bridge from childhood hurt to stealing from an old woman while telling her she was confused. I said, very softly, you had 50 years to tell her that. While she could answer, his eyes filled then. Not full tears, just that hot wetness angry people get when the story finally stops protecting them. She wasn't supposed to notice, he said. The room changed shape. Pastor Boone looked down. Aunt Sheila started crying. Denise whispered, Lord, I felt everything in me go cold and clear because that was the ugliest sentence of all. Not I didn't do it, not even I deserved it. She wasn't supposed to notice. He had counted on age, pain, confusion, maternal mercy. He had counted on all of it. Andrea broke the silence for the record. She said, did you use your mother's debit card without proper authorization? Curtis closed his eyes. When he opened them, he looked older. Yes, Aunt Sheila covered her face. And did you later attempt to characterize her concerns as confusion? His voice dropped almost to nothing. Yes. And did you tell family members that she had forgotten or distrusted Ms. Loretta James in an effort to discredit future questions? That took longer. Long enough that his silence became its own confession then. Yes, nobody moved for a moment after that. Grief has 1,000 sounds. That day it sounded like a dining room clock, and Aunt Sheila trying not to sob too loud in front of people. The legal part came next. Andrea laid out what would happen. Full accounting, restitution to the estate, Curtis removed from any administrative role, potential civil petition for elder financial exploitation, possible criminal referral if cooperation disappeared. Curtis looked at me when she said that last part. I looked back. And for the first time in my life, I understood how thin the line can be between wanting justice and wanting to destroy somebody. He had stolen from our mother. He had lied about me. He had let her spend part of her final weeks doubting her own mind. There was enough in me to burn him down. There was also Mama in me. And Mama, for all her flaws, had never enjoyed humiliation. She only believed in naming truth clearly enough that people could no longer hide inside it. So when Andrea asked whether I wanted the referral made immediately, I said, not today. Curtis looked like he might collapse from relief. I held up a hand before he could mistake that for mercy without memory. Not because I'm protecting you, I said. Because today is about getting back what belongs to her. He looked at the table. Good. Let him. In the end, the estate agreement was brutal in the clean way paperwork can be brutal. Curtis signed a full confession of unauthorized use and repayment obligation. His share of the estate was reduced to reimburse the missing funds and related costs. He was removed from control of all records and property. Every key, file, and statement had to be turned over within 48 hours. He signed because he had no real choice left, not after the loyalty numbers, not after the care notes, not after his own mouth. People always imagine justice as a speech. Sometimes it is a man in a navy suit signing 12 pages while everyone who once believed him sits in silence and watches his hand shake. After the meeting, Aunt Sheila hugged me so hard my shoulder hurt. I am so sorry, she whispered. I should have known. I hugged her back. But I didn't say the easy thing because the truth was, she shouldn't have known. Curtis had spent his whole life learning how to look reliable from the front. That is not a crime family can detect on sight. Pastor Boone stopped me in the hallway before I left. Your mother knew you follow the paper, he said. I looked at him. He nodded toward the folder in my hands. Some people leave letters. Some leave breadcrumbs. Your mama left numbers. I laughed then. A broken little laugh, but real because that sounded exactly like her. That night, for the first time since the funeral, I stayed in Mama's house without feeling like something was still moving under the floorboards. The air felt different, not lighter, not happy, just honest. I made tea in her chipped blue mug, sat at her kitchen table, and opened the last drawer I hadn't touched. Inside, under old warranties and church donation envelopes, was a sealed note with my name on it, just Loretta. In Mama's hand, I held it a long time before opening it. Inside was one folded page from her yellow legal pad. Baby, if the figures stop making sense, trust the paper before you trust anybody's face. That was the first line. I closed my eyes. Then I kept reading. I have loved your brother with more worry than wisdom some days. Do not let that become your burden after I'm gone. If something is wrong, make it stand in the light. And if anybody tells you I forgot you, they are the one hoping to be remembered better than they behaved. By the time I reached the bottom, I was crying so hard the words doubled. There was one final line: I did not forget you. I was trying to protect all my children from what truth would cost. I laid the note flat on the table and cried over it like I hadn't let myself cry at the funeral, because there it was, not a mother choosing one child over another, not a saint, not a villain, just a tired old woman trying to long to hold a family together with her own hands, while one son quietly loosened screws behind her back. Months passed. The money was repaid to the estate through Curtis's reduced share in a payment schedule Andrea made sure had real teeth in it. He moved out of his apartment after the television got sold back at a loss. Word spread, because of course it did, but not in the loud way gossip usually spreads. It moved more like smoke, quiet, ugly, impossible to pull back once a room smells of it. He came by once after everything was settled. Not inside. Just stood at the gate with his hands in his pockets while I watered Mama's roses. I'm sorry, he said. I kept watering. Not because I didn't hear him, because I wanted him to sit in the sound of not being answered right away. After a minute, I turned off the hose. For what? I asked. He looked tired. Actually tired. Not courtroom tired. Not manipulative tired. Just worn down by the fact that consequences had moved in and unpacked. For all of it, he said. For Mama, for you. I believed he was sorry. Not sorry enough to have stopped on his own, but sorry in the way people get sorry after their own reflection finally starts looking like evidence. That's between you and God, I said. His mouth tightened a little. And you? I thought about Mama's note, about family shame, about old resentments passed around like heirlooms, about the way love and damage can live in the same house, so long you stop hearing them scrape against each other. Then I said, I'll speak to you at family funerals, and if you're dying, don't ask me for more than I have. He nodded once, like he had expected exactly that. Maybe he had. Maybe for the first time in his life, he was hearing the truth without trying to negotiate it smaller. After he left, I went back inside and put Mama's note in the front of her check register, not because it belonged there, because that was where the truth started. In the numbers. In the underlined question. In the simple fact that paper doesn't care who the favorite child was or who looked more respectable in a dark suit. Paper just sits there and waits for somebody brave enough to read it. When people ask me now what happened after Mama died, I tell them this: my brother said she forgot me, but my mother remembered enough to leave me the trail. And that is the truth, the whole truth, the kind a bank statement can prove.